Welcome to the Heard on the West Exec podcast, the podcast that discusses everything you need to know about working in the executive branch of federal government. Hello, I'm Herb Dennis, board member and CFO at the American Cornerstone Institute. I served in the executive branch as the CFO of HUD under Secretary Carson during the Trump administration. This podcast is part of ACI's program called Executive Branch for America, which is designed to educate what it's like to work in the executive branch. Today's topic will discuss what it's like to work as an assistant to the secretary of a cabinet-level agency. Today, we're joined by Reed Wilson. Reed recently served as the legislative director for Congressman Pete Sessions from Texas, and prior to that, Reed was a legislative assistant to Congressman Steve Womack from Arkansas. And prior to that, Reed served as a special assistant to the Secretary Carson at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Reed, thank you so much for joining our podcast today.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
You certainly have a passion for public service, and that comes through when I review your resume and some of our prior discussions. And you're certainly building a very interesting resume from Washington. So maybe just start with give us a little bit of background on what got you interested in public service and what was your first steps into Washington.
Sure. So growing up, my dad worked as a contractor for a number of government projects, the space station, and then a few defense platforms. And so I was always interested in government work, was around that a lot of my friends' parents doing similar work. And actually on September 11th, I was very young, but one of my classmates' fathers was in the Pentagon. And so I was very interested in how we responded to that. And my parents were good at breaking that down for me. And so kind of understood the White House's policies, what the Secretary of Defense was saying, that sort of thing. And was kind of a news junkie from there on. Later, in graduate school, I worked as a middle school teacher in Mississippi. And one of my professors at Ole Miss had some previous government experience and recommended that as something that I might enjoy and learn from. And so that kind of drew me in. And then I looked for opportunities and ended up in the secretary's office.
So when you say you look for opportunities, I find it fascinating that you can go from teaching elementary school children, and some might say that prepared you very well for dealing with Congress. I don't know, but so you
a few times, yeah.
So you start with you're teaching, and you say, "Geez, I'd like to get involved in public service of sorts and government of sorts." So what was that? What was the step to get you there?
Yeah. I knew a few people who worked in government or in politics in different areas, state and local. And so I reached out to them, talked about their experience, what opportunities might come available. And then and what actually ended up landing me a job was a connection that my professor had with one of his former coworkers who was at the time working in Secretary Carson's office. And so a year before I even joined the office, I reached out to him, heard about his experience. He gave me some advice. I prepared accordingly. And then the pandemic kind of upended a lot of those plans. And that was when I continued to look for opportunities, and a job came available in the secretary's office. And I interviewed for it and went through the vetting process and was hired and started in the summer of 2020.
Well, it's fascinating that you're relatively still young in your career, getting started, and my experience at HUD when I entered was at the end of my career. So it's I do a lot of guest lecturing now, and I talk about the importance of public service at any point in a career, and this may be the start of a long-term public service and government for you. And I did it at the tail end and found it to be a fascinating experience. Maybe spend a few minutes talking about your duties at HUD and what was a typical day like. And I know there's really no such thing as a typical day and as a political appointee because things come up very unexpectedly. But maybe just spend a few minutes telling us about what your duties were and what was a typical day.
Yeah, so I mean, you came in with significant leadership experience that you were able to contribute to the agency. I didn't have uh, as much of a foundation. I had some professional foundation, but my responsibilities, I was grateful to have the opportunity to learn on the job. And so a lot of my day to day was centered on research related to different policies, maybe places that the secretary was traveling to, or initiatives that we had underway or were looking to develop. And then editing a variety of documents that were going out under the secretary's name. So guidance that was coming from the agency level, press releases, op-eds. I was by no means the final say in those, but had an opportunity to be exposed to a wide array of kind of product that the agency was putting out, and that helped me learn on the job pretty quickly. So I also compiled and sent a weekly report to leadership at the agency, where every program office would send me kind of a rundown of what they had going on that week, and then I would compile it, distill it down into a report, and send it out to the leadership of all the program offices. And that gave me a great vantage point to just see what was going on, what every office was involved with, and I had a bird's eye view, and I was really grateful for that.
Well, Reed, you know, it's interesting you talk about those weekly reports and how important that is because, I actually write about this in a book I wrote about the experience in transforming an agency from a financial discipline standpoint, which was my responsibility. And one thing you learn in government, a little bit different than the private sector, is you don't have a lot of time to make a change, right? You've got basically
Yeah.
have 4 years in an administration to impact something you want to impact. And those weekly reports are really important for the secretary to laser focus on what was accomplished this last week and what needs to be accomplished over the next several weeks to meet the objectives. Like every agency, and you saw this, every agency follows from a management standpoint, the president's management agenda. And that is the framework that the agencies need to follow for whatever the initiatives are. And every president has that. And within that framework are some real specific action items. And we had a strategic priority one of our strategic priorities was to financial discipline. And that weekly monitoring was such an important role. And sometimes when you come in, you're working with people that are much more senior. Everyone needs to realize in the executive branch, every role is important. You know, there's about 3,500 political appointees amongst all the agencies, and every one of those roles are important. And I've always said, that you're only as strong as your weakest link. And, the weekly reporting that you did was really important to the administration and the management of the agencies. What
Yeah.
did you interact with a lot of other agencies, whether it be the White House, OMB, Congress, or any other intergovernmental agencies?
Mhm.
I found it fascinating because I knew nothing about government when I went in there, so that was a big learning for me. How important it is for the interconnectivity of all of the branches and the offices within the executive branch have to work together to accomplish what we were trying to accomplish. How did you find that in your role?
Yeah. So to your previous point, we've got four years, and every week makes a big difference if you're going to make change, right? Every week has to show some kind of incremental change. And in Congress, that we talk a lot about how the government is like steering a large ship, slow to turn, slow to make course corrections. But I don't think it has to be that way. And I think at HUD we did a really good job of getting those incremental, one click at a time change. And at the end, we had a product that we were all proud of. And the same could be said for many agencies during that time. I didn't have as much exposure to other agencies as some, but definitely I was surprised by the how much the agencies did work together. I remember working on a COVID relief guidance document that had feedback from 5 or 6 different agencies, sometimes multiple offices within those agencies, all shaping the document after in their perspective, and that was interesting. Just the overwhelming amount of information that was included in that document, the very significant implications for the customer, the taxpayer, cities and municipalities that were using that relief, and then the overall direction was being shaped by multiple agencies. And so that was surprising, impressive for sure, but definitely made a point to me that these agencies have to work in pretty close coordination, and it's important to have relationships within interagency process to be able to move that kind of thing forward quickly.
I'm glad you mentioned the COVID experience. Again, I had close to 40 years of private sector experience, not really understanding how government operates. I was really impressed by the amount of effort and intelligence and mission that people are driven to inside of the executive branch and government at large. And there were basically 3 times that I would consider that really was very impactful to the government having to act quickly to something that wasn't expected. And that's when you see the politicals and everyone step up to the plate and work hard for the American people. HUD, as every agency, they have their mission and it's very focused on that. But there's times you get redirected to another disaster, and COVID was one of that. You remember the CARES Act? That was in response to COVID, and each agency had to react in a way that they weren't working the day before, right? So
Right.
The money came at us quick. We had to get it out to the people that we serve quickly. And that takes a different level of discipline, and you see everyone working hard. The shutdown was another example where people are working very hard to make sure mission is being delivered to the people that we serve. And HUD specifically and FEMA, anytime there's a natural disaster, people are just, they step up to the plate. And I wish the American people could see the behind the scenes of how hard the government employees and the politicals work to make sure that America's not disrupted by those type of disasters. If you had to think of, and I'm a little bit jealous of your generation. You're getting starting. I'm on kind of the tail end of my my career, so I'm excited for that you get to experience this the executive branch and government at a young stage, and it'll drive you to do some fun stuff going on. What would you say your biggest learnings were at HUD while you were there?
Yeah. I mean, I saw what an effective team looked like, how good staffers prepared an exceptional principal to be effective and deliver value. I think, there's often misplaced stereotypes that government is slow or not motivated to get a result. And what I saw on our team was that leadership matters, making decisions that have large implications. Don't have to, we don't have to wring our hands over them. We have to be thoughtful and deliberative, and that was a big one. And then also how important relationships are across the board. I saw that again and again from my chain of command. Had relationships in the White House and other agencies that helped us get the information we needed, helped us get to the place that we needed to be for mission success. And that was huge for me in the first stage of this career in government, to be able to see what that looks like.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think an important point that honestly it wasn't necessarily intuitive to me when I went into the executive branch at HUD with Secretary Carson. The amount of networking and relationships you develop will last forever, and 90% of what I do now is a result of my time in Washington and at HUD. And you really do work with a lot of spectacular people, and they're there to help. You will run into those folks at some point down the road, and And that actually would go into the next topic I'd like to talk with you about. I know you're over in Congress now, and
Yeah.
tell me about how that came about and how that transition was, and how did the executive branch help you, if it did, in what you're doing now in legislative
Mhm.
affairs?
Absolutely. So, when my toughest day in the administration was when I had to leave, and I knew I wasn't ready to put this chapter behind me, and so I wanted to continue in the field and continue in the work, and pursued other opportunities, a campaign opportunity, and then another similar position that kind of helped boost my resume, get me out there. I talked to dozens of people um, on the Hill who had served in the kinds of jobs that I wanted, had served in the kinds of jobs that I was interested in, and got connected eventually with Congressman Womack's office, and who's a member from Arkansas. Um, I spoke with his senior staff. We um, talked about what it would look like to work in their office, and they had a position open, and so they offered it to me, and I started a few days or in late January 2021. Um, and from there, I learned a whole lot about the legislative process, but I also came in with a eyewitness understanding of the regulatory process, which was very helpful for someone who is still a relatively junior staffer on Capitol Hill to have that experience, and then also just I think to kind of humanize the agency. So often it's easy to think that these agencies are just big masses that are of faceless people, and to have known many of them, that was very helpful.
It's interesting. And this wasn't necessarily intuitive to me either when I started. And I'm sure you're going to appreciate this. Just
Mhm.
the unexpected fun things that happen inside the executive branch. Washington, I found to be a very unique town.
Mhm.
Certainly political, to state the obvious, but there's a lot of learnings that can be had. But there's also just a lot of learnings of our history. Just to
Mhm.
walking through the White House, working at the Eisenhower Executive Office, and working in these historic buildings is I found very fascinating. You're exposed to things that not necessarily job related, but they're history related. And now you're working over on the Hill. That's got to have that same experience that you felt at HUD and working within the executive branch. And could you spend a minute reflecting on that at a young age? And I know there's more to come for you related to
Yeah. Absolutely. These so often public sector jobs in government, appointee positions in an administration are not glamorous. They're not, they're not delivering an outsized value to shareholders. So you have to have an appreciation for that the historic implications of what you are doing, how you're serving your country, how you're delivering results for your states, communities. That's real. And some of the best days in a political appointee position are when you get to talk to people who have been affected by the policies that you've worked on. But on all the other days, you have to uh, maintain kind of a grounding in that the work that you're doing is, um, you know, it, you are putting into effect some of the principles that our founders intended for this country um, to hold. You are helping to implement laws that the duly elected members of Congress wrote and deliberated over and passed into law and were signed by the president as defined by the Constitution. There's a gravitas that comes with that, and you're missing something in this space if you don't have an appreciation for that.
Yeah, it's so well said. I do know, this. I retired from a full career at Ernst and Young with my firm, and this was. I wanted to give back and do meaningful work in retirement, and this met that criteria. But I was a little bit nervous. Was I going to enjoy it? And
Right.
because it's a these are big time jobs. These are full commitments, and I was somewhat retired, and I said to the secretary, I want to make sure I'm going to enjoy this, and he said, "You're going to enjoy it, and the reason is you're going to feel that you're helping the American people, and it's going to really mean something." And he was absolutely right. And that was one of my favorite 4 years of my professional career. And I always tell, I do a lot of guest lecturing at colleges, and like I mentioned earlier, I tell folks that if you ever have the opportunity to work in the executive branch and be part of public service, it's very meaningful and it really adds value to your resume. If I'd have had these 4 years earlier in my career, I would have been a better consultant to my clients. And then conversely, if everyone in the financial realm of these agencies had private sector experience, maybe the financial discipline would be a little bit stronger. So, I find that it's very, very meaningful work, and you wake up every morning energized by it, and I think it's really an important role. I know you're young, and I'm sure you got, maybe 5-10 year outlooks, but where would you hope this all takes you someday? You look to run for office, or how do you think of this long term?
Yeah, I don't really see myself called to running for office, but I do want to continue to help. I was drawn to this field because I believed in the mission, right? I believed in what the president was moving toward, and the agenda that he'd set out, and the way in which the secretary was putting that into motion. So I wanted to be a part of to help in whatever small way I could. Under no illusion that would be I'd be a major player. So I want to continue in that same spirit, and I think that the skills here are transferable. So if I'm called to work in a private sector role, then I would be interested in that. But otherwise, in my immediate short-term view, I want to continue to advance an agenda of that uplifts the American people, and it makes our government more honest. That's I really enjoy that, and feel a lot of purpose in that. And the studies will show that people my age derive a lot of value from the purpose that they can get from their work. So I'm right there in that group, and look forward to seeing what's next in that space.
Well, Reed, I think you're a real inspiration to your generation and all those that you work with. And I know we were really thrilled to have you at HUD. You did a great job, and I wish you great success. And as we run out of time here, any parting thoughts you'd like to share and before we close?
Yeah, I would just say that I encourage anyone right out of college or early to mid-career to look into public sector jobs. I think before I got this position, I didn't know how people got these positions, but a lot of it is reaching out to those looking. There are job banks out there that people who are in hiring positions for government look at, and most everyone has a skill set that they can contribute to their government. And as we've talked about, it's rewarding. No matter what role you're playing, if you're willing to show up and contribute, it is certainly worth your time and consideration.
Reed, thank you for joining us today. Really enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully we'll do it again someday. And for all the participants, thank you for joining this week's program. Please subscribe for free on Apple or Google Play or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed the show, please give us a 5-star rating, and remember to tell your friends that you heard it on the West Exec.